is consciousness confined to the skull, or does it reach out and touch the world? Turns out that about 15% of the people who played with our machines were able to change the way they behaved. Those who were more likely to be successful knew to get out of their own way, to let the connection arise, to accept that it's possible to touch the world out there just by thinking. When we look at the data around Steve Jobs from the time he died till 24 hours later, it was a spectacularly strong effect. We found that to be true of 2 or 3 popes either dying or being elected. Nelson Mandela, the probability against chance being able to explain something like this is 3 trillion to 1. In every other science, it would be a kind of foregone conclusion that this is a real phenomenon in the world.
And we are back for another episode of Being Human. I'm delighted to say I'm here with Roger Nelson. He's a consciousness researcher. He's the founder of the Global Consciousness Project. And he is an author of this book, Connected, The Emergence of Global Consciousness, which was a fascinating study on just that, global consciousness. So I'm delighted to have you here, Roger. Big, warm welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Richard. I'm delighted to be here.
Great.
Where beer is.
Yes. Well, I'm in the market town of Bury St Edmunds in Suffolk, in England. And where are you joining us from?
I'm in upstate New York, near Ithaca, where Cornell University is.
Okay, right. Well, welcome from near New York. Could you, give us a little bit? I like to do this with all my guests. A little bit of your backstory, some of your early influences, and perhaps those, especially that shaped you to take an interest in this topic of consciousness.
Wow. That goes back a long way, because I became interested when I was a child, really, a teenager anyway. I was interested in, I grew up in Nebraska, in a little town, and I became interested in martial arts. I wanted to learn judo or jujitsu or something. There was nobody around who was interested in that or knew anything about it. So I went to the library and couldn't find any books that I was looking for, but I accidentally found one on yoga, Hatha yoga, but it was written by a German and an Indian. And the two of them together put such a beautiful richness of understanding that we are different, each from the other, but we're also very much alike, that we have needs that are going to be different depending on where we live. For example, vegetarian diet is great, but not if you live in Alaska or in the Siberian tundra. You really need some animal fats, apparently, to survive. So I was impressed, and I became more and more interested in the sort of spiritual aspect of that. Long time passes, and I don't really have much contact with it. I became a professor of psychology in a small college in northern Vermont. And there I was teaching experimental psychology. What do you want to do experiments about? People said 2 things. One of them was marijuana. This is in the 1970s. And the other one was psychic stuff, ESP. We want to know if we can use telepathy to connect with each other. So I was very happy to sponsor research in either of those areas, and had a good time. Yeah. And then after a few years teaching, I decided I was really a researcher at heart, and I started looking for a different place to be, and accidentally, really quite by coincidence, found an advertisement for a job at Princeton University in the engineering school. studying what they advertise as the lesser known aspects of consciousness. So I thought, this sense of taste or smell or maybe touch, something like that. Turned out it was none of those. It was instead what people often refer to as a sixth sense
Right.
that is making these connections with other people or connections with the world mentally without uh, any of the normal senses. So that turned out to be where I spent the next 20 some years, sort of directing or coordinating research on a big variety of different things, but all related to consciousness, touching the world or touching another consciousness. And it was utterly fascinating. I do no longer even know what's happening in the fields of psychology that I had inhabited earlier,
Right.
right? Because this is just, always, if you're a curious person, I was even as a child, you want to know what's going on right at the edge. And
Yeah.
that's what this laboratory at Princeton was doing. Research at the edge of what do we know about consciousness.
Right.
So that's the background. And then part of that, well, maybe you have another
Yeah,
question.
well, that's it. Yeah. So you land at Princeton. You already done some extrasensory perception research. So had you already discovered something about human beings that was out of the ordinary when you were doing your first studies in psychology?
What I discovered was the absolutely necessary thing for a truly scientific kind of attitude in research. The results were reasonable. They weren't spectacular. I wasn't finding that by mental efforts we can knock down the doors or open the garage door, even, you know, but that there is an effect. There is a correlation between what we wish and dream of and what happens in the world. The correlation is weak and it isn't always there. You won't always find it when you try, but you, I'm, I became necessarily became a pretty good statistician. And if you are a pretty good statistician, you can tell the difference between something that's an accident or just a coincidence and something that is a real but very small effect. So the thing that I discovered early on was that there is a scientific way of looking at these things. And the answer to the question, whether it's there, is rather easily answered ultimately if you're patient. You can't do it in one session, but if you're patient and you're willing to put in the work, you can gather evidence as strong as is necessary, even as strong as there is anything in any other field of science.
Great. And we're definitely going to get that. So, and what I'm interested in, so what was the first time you did an experiment and you were like, okay, there is something here, something showing up, albeit faint. What was that first moment for you? Can you recall?
Well, that's an interesting question, which I can't answer because it seems like it grew
Okay.
from a kind of interesting question into a question that had developed many manifestations. How about here, and under what circumstances, and why? What does this mean? What is it good for? Those kinds of things began, taking over. I became basically a wide open, questioning machine, looking in various directions and various parts of the picture.
Okay. And so this I guess this curiosity just grew and you were exposed to more and more data over time and you became uh, more convinced that there is something here, albeit faint. Um,
Right.
and
There's
what was,
another
go on? Yeah.
another thing that I should mention, right? At this stage, because it's really a necessary early step, and that is to develop the instrumentation, the experimental designs, and the nature of the question is important. All those kinds of things. So the first several years in Princeton were spent developing refined instruments, really, the kind of thing where you could depend on the answer being a true answer, even if the effect that you're looking at is small and weak and fragile. Nevertheless, you won. So we developed basically what we refer to as REG, random event generator. People usually say random number generator technology, to the point where it became a tool, an instrument that we could use to ask the question, is consciousness confined to the skull, or does it reach out and touch the world? The world now being manifested in the form of a random sequence of numbers that should be random under all circumstances, but turns out not to be random when you aim consciousness at it in the right way. So, in other words, we develop tools, and so we can talk more about the
Yeah.
application of those tools in the laboratory and in group consciousness studies, and ultimately in the big network of the whole
Yeah.
world.
Well, let's start with the most basic version of that then. So somebody sits down and tries to get this random number generator to be less random. Is that
Yes.
how it works?
So the way we usually did it at the PEAR Lab, and it's similar everywhere, but we had this random number generator with a display of just a number early on, later graphs, which made things richer, I guess, as an experience for the person. We call it an operator, not a subject, an operator, right? So the random number generator was set to just turn out random numbers. And like, for example, what it really does is something like a coin flipper, but very fast, electronic coin flipper, producing what we call bits, ones and zeros. And so we would set up a trial of 200 bits every second, um, and sum the 200 bits, which should produce a number like roughly 100, plus or minus 5 or 6 or 7 or 10. So a sequence of numbers like 102, 94, 107, 108, 115, oh my, and so on. And ask people to try to get high numbers one time. And then as a balance, try to get low numbers from the same machine under the same circumstances. And then for a third condition, we called a baseline, just let that machine do what it does. Don't try to get in its way, which people found hard to do. So they not only tried to get high numbers and low numbers under those instructions, but they tried to get good baselines, meaning it shouldn't divert very much.
Okay.
This is an accidental discovery. We didn't ask anybody to do that, but they did, and they succeeded. So the variance, the width of variation for the baselines was smaller than it should be. Anyway, we worked on that until we had a very high quality kind of instrument for looking at this kind of question, whether consciousness can change the way a random number process proceeds. And we eventually worked to miniaturize the instrument. We're talking early on about the 1980s, when there was not even such a thing as a laptop. Most people don't know that, right? Or
Yeah.
most people don't remember that anyway. And certainly, so the first random number generator was a suitcase kind of machine. It was big, sitting on a table. But so we miniaturized and eventually made things that you could easily fit into your palm or into the proverbial pack of matches or cigarettes or whatever they say. And the idea there was that we could give these devices to other people so that they could replicate what we were doing. You try to, expand, try to do other experiments. And also, we were then able ourselves to move out of the laboratory and develop a kind of instrument or protocol for asking what happens if you have one of these random number generators in a group that becomes coherent. And what does that mean? It means a group that really kind of comes together around something. Maybe it's something they're doing, meditation, or maybe just a meeting about some project, but a really good meeting, the kind that absorbs everybody so completely that you don't even know that you're separate people. For a while, you're working as a group. That kind of solidified, coherent group consciousness was something we were very interested in.
Right.
What happens to a random number generator in that circumstance? That was the next
Yeah.
part.
And
And even
and
if
there's
the
kind
people
in the
on the
book from that.
pardon,
What I'm really curious about, to go right back to the start, was, so I got two questions that are, so you put these people in the lab, you tell them, try and make this generator give you more ones than zeros, or more zeros than ones, or try and make it even, and they're successful some of the time. So my first question is, was there a pattern in the people who could do this and couldn't do it?
yes, it's like the effect size. It's weak. It's a weak kind of distinction, but it's quite real. Uh, After many, many years, we had accumulated huge amounts of data from a pretty large number of people, 100, 125 or something like that people. And one of my friends, colleagues, York Dobbins, did an analysis to ask exactly that question. Is there a differentiation? It turns out that about 15% of the people who played with our machines were able to change the way they behave with sufficient reliability that we could see the effect. And the other people, the rest, would succeed sometimes, but they would uh, uh, dilute that success by a failure, if you want to call it that. We didn't care which way the data went. We just wanted to know what people were doing, how they were feeling about it, and so forth.
Right.
So a success wasn't defined as only getting high numbers when that was the task, but getting through the process and learning personally something from it, which we learned from them. Um, it, I guess is the perfect time to say what people generally learned, and those who were more likely to be successful knew, was to get out of their own way, to let the connection arise, to
Right.
accept that it's possible to touch the world out there just by
Okay.
thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. And that was the difference about the. Was that also what was true about the top 15%, that they had this ability to let go and connect?
About
So
uh, you're
so
asking about a group of
yeah, so
people.
you're saying that there was 15% of people who could reliably affect these machines.
Yeah.
So what was special about them?
Well, I think there are several things. I was kind of listing them off in a way. They were willing to play and happy to play with the machine. To probably acceptance, something like acceptance of the possibility being real was absolutely important. And then I think a good many people in that group of 15% or whatever would go a step further and you might say have faith that it was going to work, not just accept that it might or it could, but accept that it will now for me uh, produce the effect that I'm trying to achieve. Yeah. There was a kind of confidence. There's a much
Right.
higher, yeah. And then that's complicated because it's born of its own, uh, occurrence. So if you succeed once and then fail the next time, you're kind of like left balanced, right? But if
Right.
you succeed and you succeed again, you succeed a third time, you're beginning to say, "Oh, it works. I'm able to do this. I am connected with the machine." So it's a kind of feedback process, which is self-reinforcing. And on the other hand, I think it's probably fair to say that the potential exists for anybody to go ahead. But what the people who actually succeed, as we said, reliably, it, they're they've achieved a kind of acceptance and confidence that it's a real phenomenon that they can tap into.
You're right. And I tell you what comes to mind as you say that is Steve Jobs, right? People talk about Steve Jobs as having this reality distortion feel around him, right? Where he just had total faith in having something happen that most people around him perhaps thought was crazy or impossible. And this may be a kind of wild extrapolation from what you observed with these experiments, but that's what it comes to mind is does it tell us, is it some indication that this belief that simply by having faith that you can achieve some outcome in the world, you are actually shifting the world at some level? Is that too much of an assertion to make?
I would say absolutely yes.
Right.
Yeah. But and you don't expect to go to the casino and win at the roulette table. It's not that strong, right? The odds are very heavily against you in any casino game, right? But
Right.
people have been praying and wishing for good outcomes and asking for the weather to change to more favorable. Let's have some rain, please. People do that. They have been doing it for thousands of years, for all we know, tens or hundreds of thousands of years. Probably as long as we've been able to talk, we have done a little bit of praying in the midst of our talk.
Right.
And we don't generally, I mean, sometimes we repeat stupid actions, but we don't generally repeat things forever for thousands of years if they're totally valueless.
Right.
There's
Yeah.
something that we have been rewarded for believing that it's possible to change the world by wishing for it to change.
Yeah. Um,
And Steve Jobs was a master. I, th- I would like to take a little vignette out here. We, in the Global Consciousness Project, had many kinds of events. One kind of event that we took up every now and then was when a very famous person, much loved by the public or whatever, such a person died. We looked at the data. When we looked at the data around Steve Jobs from the time he died till 24 hours later, was a spectacularly strong effect. What does
mm,
that mean? We don't know what that means. But we found that to be true of two or three popes, either dying or being elected. Nelson Mandela passing, um, the, the dancer, the singer dancer, Michael Michael
Jackson.
Michael Jackson. Yeah,
Yeah. 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 I still remember where I was when he died.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
That's the sort of thing that the network pays attention to.
Yeah.
When huge numbers of us are all focused on something like that, we're joined together we are brought together. We become a kind of unconscious connection, an unconsciously connected crew of people around the world. It's powerful.
Yeah. And I can't wait to get onto that, the network of these random event generators and what you're able to infer from looking at the way that they behave. Um, but just coming back to these experiments, so we've got these 15% of special people, they can change it more than the rest, and there are certain characteristics of them. And one being, faith, having faith in their ability to do it. Um, what was the Steelman argument against you? So the uber skeptics who came in and their consciousness only exists between the four walls of your brain. There's no way that anybody is affecting these machines. This is all bollocks, to use an English expression. You know, what's what's the response to those the hard skeptic?
Well, there are two kinds of skeptics, and sometimes the hard skeptics aren't really skeptics. They're deniers. They're people who don't look at the data, but because they know the data cannot be real, that there must be fraud or there must be some kind of chicanery. Even if even if there is tremendously powerful evidence, they don't look at it
Right.
because they know it's impossible. So I think the answer or the response that's deserved is to ignore those people. And um, we had a visit every now and then. Some relatively well-known or famous skeptic would come by. There was a guy named James Randi, who's a magician. He wasn't a scientist, but he was invited by the department of the university to come and give a prestigious address in a science forum, right? So what he came to do was to trash the PEAR Lab, and but he was a clever guy. He decided that it would be a good idea to visit the PEAR Lab. He did, and when he after looking at all the experiments and hearing how they work and so forth, he said, "Well, please give me a graph. I'll put it on the wall. I don't know what's wrong now, but I'll figure it out." Right? Then he just another little vignette. He then gave his talk, which was all about how you, the people convince themselves of things that aren't true. They aren't necessarily malign or awful people, but they just don't know what they're doing. And he said, "I'm going to show you a very important and easy case where you can see what happened." There was a horse called Clever Hans, and Clever Hans could do arithmetic. So if his trainer said, "What's 2 times 3?" Clever Hans would hit the floor 6 times. And what's 4 plus 1? 5 times. And now Randy said, "I'm going to roll the film back and show you what's actually happening at slow speed." So he rolled the film back, he turned it on again, and what came up on the screen was an operating room somewhere. And in other words, probably, who knows, the psychic effect of a bunch of people not exactly believing that he was an honest man ruined his demonstration.
Hey.
Just by whatever, yeah. Anyway, that's he was an example of a hard skeptic. But there are people who are, softer skeptics, people who have questions. Why don't you do this? Have you considered that? And the answer in those cases is, yes, we have done that, or that's a good idea. We'll check that out in the next round of experiments.
Right.
So,
But the bottom line is that statistically, you're seeing people able to manipulate these at greater than the rate of chance. And there's no physical connection between the individual and machine. There's no other means of them impacting this machine.
right. There's a subset of the experiments which make it even more obvious that that's the case. Sometimes we ask people to produce an effect on the instrument or the machine tomorrow. We'll run the machine tomorrow, but I want you to think about changing
Wow.
its behavior now.
Wow.
And that works. In fact, it works slightly better with it's not enough to call it significant. Works slightly better than doing it on time. Can also be yesterday. In other words, the time of your thinking about it is not so important as your focus on the outcome. So,
Well, hang on. How do I do it yesterday? Surely that's already recorded. How can I affect it from yesterday?
people call it retrocausality, and that's a topic in mainstream physics. And basically, what turned out to be the case is that the equations defining the way the world progresses through time or way time unfolds are symmetrical. So they work equally well. The equations work equally well going forward in time and backward in time. And people say that means I don't know whether this is true, but people think that means that it's possible to have an effect, a retrocausal effect. So I'm now causing something that happened yesterday. So the most famous examples of that were early on a guy named Helmut Schmidt, who was an early researcher using random number generator. He recorded the data on tape as clicks and not clicks, and he stored some of those tapes. He stored them away, and then maybe months later, he would bring out one of those stored tapes and ask somebody to change the clicks in the direction of intention now. And the take, that was, by the way, when I was teaching in northern Vermont, and
Right.
I got wind of the job and began thinking seriously about it in Princeton. I went to the library and I found some journals, and that was the first article I read. And I was at that time a kind of avant-garde musician, among other things, and so I knew how tapes work, and I knew that this was completely impossible. But it turned out that experimentally it was not impossible. The tapes that had been recorded and never listened to prior to this were now changed in the direction that the person who was given the task asked it to change. And the only way that can have happened, we think, is that for the thinking now to retrocausally have an effect on the tape that were recorded months ago.
Which is just mind blowing, isn't it? That.
It is, yeah. I mean, all of this stuff it's no easier. I mean, it's actually because time is such a demanding environment for us. We don't, we can't understand how that could happen, and we can't understand how premonitions work either, but they do. And we have, lots of experiments that show that the effect that you can produce on data that won't be written down until tomorrow is just as good as the effect that you have on data being generated while you're thinking about it.
Well, you said something else. You said even more. You've got even more chance of affecting it in the future.
Slightly more. Yeah. I have always found that fascinating. And I take it as a kind of message that we should be thinking, how could that be? Or what does that mean? And what to me it means is that this is part of that acceptance stuff I was talking about early on. If we are confronted with an impossible task, we're more likely to give up and relax and take it easy, aren't we? Well, that's not possible, but I have the task, so I'll think about it. And the fact that it's completely, utterly impossible seems to enable it a little bit
Right.
compared
A bit like a
to
sort of Zen koan, right? You're in such a state of confusion,
perfect.
you somehow enter a
Yeah,
different mode. Yeah.
nicely. No, that's a good way to think about it.
Right. Yeah.
What is this hand, this single hand? How is this
Single
flapping?
collapse. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So this is the early experiments is just sort of man and machine, one person affecting the clicks and all the ones and zeros. You're seeing this impact. Um, and and then tell us you started to tell a story of then how this expanded and you were able to miniaturize the machines, you were able to take them out. I think you call
Yep.
them field rigs, right? Or
Yeah,
field
yeah.
REGs, right? That 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 you can move around the place. And yeah, tell us about the sort of the the intention there and what started to
Okay,
play out.
like a next step from the
Yeah,
one person and
yeah,
one machine is two people in one machine.
okay,
What happens if we gang up on it, right? Well, it turns out that was very revealing to study that. We had different kinds of pairs of people who didn't know each other, people who knew each other, and people who were bonded, really a couple or a married couple, for example. And the effect size is how powerful was the effect was much larger. I calculate 4 times larger than either the people in a pair who were bonded um, going it alone. So we had data in many cases where these individuals had their own databases, my machine
Right.
and her machine, whatever, and then doing it as a couple. So that was important. And what is bonding about anyway? And it makes you think about those kinds of things. So then we
Mm.
started thinking about larger groups. What if we have like 10 people? And what if they're all bonded? How are we going to get 10 people to be bonded? So we look for things like rituals, which are designed to produce the kind of coherent, resonant group they have always. That's why they were developed in the first place, to bring us together, to create a multi-headed organism that has one kind of unitary presence in the world. And so so we started taking a random number generator. I by this time they were this small, and attached to this is still early days, a long time before smartphones. So a palm top computer is about this big, right? I had a little purse, a strap, which had a place for logbook for making notes, and a place for the random number generator and some extra batteries. Always need batteries. Yeah. And I would go to, and I wasn't alone. My friend, colleague Brenda she and Bob John, who was the director of the lab, loved opera. So they took field rate to opera. And the question we're asking is, are there times during an opera when people are really powerfully focused and all together and really gathered? And there are. The many of the arias, which are familiar to almost anybody who's interested in opera, are things that they capture us and
Right.
they bring us together. Same is true for rock bands that really grab the acceptance and presence of large numbers of people. Um, so we would take a random number generator into those kinds of situations that mark the beginning of the aria and the end of the aria. So we had a moment in time, and we look at the data from that moment in time, and we would find very often that during the aria, the data would be unusual, would be non-random. Same for meditation, for moments during meditations when everybody is uh, in a group, is brought together, and so on. I never was able to myself measure meditations because I always wanted to meditate. I couldn't do both. But I learned how to do both when I was traveling in Egypt with a group of 19 people who were interested in the ancient religions. And we went to all the sacred places, and we went to the inner chambers of the pyramids and so on. And we did chanting and meditation rituals. And I had to learn to kind of have a automaton that would press buttons that said beginning and ending of time segments.
Right.
But time after time, those situations where we were in a sacred space, or we sort of define as a sacred space, and um, meditating together, or especially chanting together, we really came together. Time after time, the effects would be strong. So that's what we called field rate. We went to concerts and big meetings, and we did control things like going to street corners and train stations where there's chaos, no coherence at all, and found basically flat outcomes, no deviation from randomness to speak of. And all of that led to more questions. What if it's a bigger group? All right. And the easiest way to get a really big group was to think about global consciousness. So I started asking my friends who did this kind of work for a couple of different, you might call them prototype experiments for the soon to be built global consciousness network. I asked people to take data during the funeral ceremonies for Diana, for example. That was, according to the media, that was going to bring a couple of, they'd said 2 billion people will be paying attention more or less in synchrony because of the radio, the news, the television broadcast and so forth around the world. It was and sure enough, I had 14 data lines, and the odds against chance were about 100 to 1 that there should be as much deviation as there was during the 6-hour ceremony
And
funeral.
so, and those multiple data lines, was this at the point now where you'd got these random event generators in different spots around the world that you'd reached that point?
Yeah, and I didn't have that already at the time of Diana's funeral, but was started working on it already about that time, and had by that was in September of 1997, I think, and we had data flowing in a network a year later, in October 1998. So, and then continued to build the network bigger. So we had up to about 70 nodes around the world in almost all continents, nothing in Antarctica. But otherwise, we covered the world pretty well, considering we were completely dependent on volunteers say, yes, I'd like to do that. I have a computer that runs constantly, that sort of thing.
So the internet was a breakthrough for you guys because you could then connect, easily harvest these data streams from around the world.
Right. It was this project, the Global Consciousness Project, could not have been started much earlier than it was because the internet was only coming into being in the 90s.
Yeah.
And made it hard to remember how bare the cupboard was in terms of electronics and the communication networks and stuff like that in the 90s. That doesn't seem like a terribly long time ago, but in terms of technology, it is really long time ago.
Yeah.
So the I asked you again, any of my friends, anybody who's interested, let's work together and build out this network. And then we agreed on a tight protocol, the sort of thing that would these hard-nosed skeptics could look at our data. And by the way, it was always open source. Everything you could get all the software and have at it. You could get all the data and do your own analysis. Always,
Right.
that was the way the thing was set up to begin with. So the skeptics were left a little at sea, trying to find something wrong with the Global Consciousness Project, and there never has been much um, useful skepticism. The closest thing would be people who say, but, there's no way for you to get to change a bit just by thinking about it. It has to have some kind of physical force to change a bit from a 1 to a 0, that sort of thing. But that's a physics understanding, and it's not necessarily complete, as physics struggles to deal with consciousness at all, and so it doesn't normally.
Yeah.
So what we say, keep paying attention, keep working, you build your models out because there are things your models don't cover. And here's data that you cannot accommodate in a standard Newtonian physics model.
Right.
Probably not in quantum physics either, without getting serious about some definitions like what the hell is consciousness anyway, and
Yeah.
is it really important in changing the way electrons move or anything like that?
Yeah. Yeah. And as I understand it from the way that you've constructed the sort of analysis of the data is you have a set of hypotheses, right? You hypothesize that this event coming up um, ought to provide for us a shift in the data,
Yeah.
um, given what we understand about how events impact this, and and it has predictive power. It's proved out to have predictive power. Right?
Yes. And once again, it's not always there, and it's not. Sometimes it's actually backwards. If the uh, website, which is global-mind.org, if anybody wants to look or download data and analyze it and so forth, that has a chart, a giant table showing all of the events, 500 events that we ever did. And associated with that is what we call the prediction registry or hypothesis registry, where the start time and end time and the type of analysis was all registered before any data were examined. So,
Right.
so that stuff is all available for anybody to look at. And what if you look down through all the data, you'll find plenty of occasions. About 1/3 of them are in the wrong direction. Only about 2/3 are in the right direction, but that's enough to produce a huge statistical effect
Right.
because there's many of the events. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's bring that up on screen now. So for those watching, uh,
Yeah.
this is well, yeah, for people who are just listening, let's try and explain this. So this is the Global Consciousness Project results from August 1998 to December 2015. There's 500 of these events that you've just described where you're expecting to see some kind of effect, and then there are a bunch of terms here that I'm guessing most people aren't going to understand. So we've got this. Well, what's the y-axis here? It's
Okay.
uh,
So
a
the y-axis is a cumulative z-score.
yes,
Z-score is a normalized score for. It can be used for all kinds of data, but in our case, there's a distribution of scores. It's mostly they're close to zero difference from expectation, but some are spread out and some are out in the tails, either negative or positive tails. So the expected value is 100, and that turns into a z-score of, because we make the z-score, we change that so that the expected deviation is zero.
right,
Okay. So that's way down at the bottom there. And you can see that if you look at the red line, the wiggly line, you'll see that there's some jogs up and some jogs down. The jogs up are positive z-scores. In other words, z-scores that go in the direction that we predicted.
which is
And
more order, less randomness, right?
correct. Yeah.
And then a negative would be what, even more random? How do we get even more random than random?
It's actually a matter of correlations. The z-score that we're looking at is actually representing a correlation between a sum of paired correlations. Remember, there's 50 or 60 or 70 of these devices,
Yeah,
and our score, the original score, really is a representation of how many pairs are correlated when they shouldn't be correlated at all. They're a
okay,
thousand kilometers separated from each other, or hundreds, or 10,000 kilometers separated. In other words, they're spread around the world, and they become correlated. Some of my friends use a rubber duck analogy. Like, if you think of an ocean, it has waves. And if you have a bunch of rubber ducks, then when a wave goes up, the duck will rise. If you have a whole bunch of coordinated waves, then all the ducks will rise together. And
right.
that is a positive correlation. But if you have a bunch of waves that aren't coherent, there will be some down separating the ones that are up. So
Mm,
you have down and up, down and up. And those down and up correlations are actually negative correlations. My duck drops when your duck rises. That's a negative correlation. So, and that produces a negative z score, or z score that's smaller than zero, and plotted in this graph that makes a jog downward. You can see
okay.
there are lots of jogs downward, but the preponderance, the majority of jogs are upwards. And even though they're all small jogs, they add up tremendously because there's so many. Because we've been patiently doing the experiment for 17 years at this point. Yeah.
Right. And the
And
chance, go on, sorry.
so I was just going to say the bottom line, the chance outcome is the probability against chance being able to explain something like this is trillions, 3 trillion to 1. In other words, it is such a strong effect when you count everything up, when you accommodate all of those data, negative and positive. It's such a strong effect that that in every other science, it would be a kind of foregone conclusion that this is a real phenomenon in the world. So I think it is a real phenomenon in the world. And lots of people do. Most people who are, who familiarize themselves with the data come to the conclusion that even though we don't know how to explain it, there is something there which we really ought to try to explain because it has to do with human consciousness.
Yeah.
These jogs up and down are all, by our kind of best or definition we can make, they're events in global consciousness space. They're events in a space where we're all coming together, even though we don't know about it.
And that was one question I had was, it may not even be possible to answer this, but do we only see this for events that affect humans? Like in my mind, I was thinking, are there events that just affect fish? And do we see a shift in the data there? Like, or is this just a register of human consciousness or events that affect human consciousness?
Yeah, it really is a human oriented. There's no question about that. Although there are some couple of funny kind of things that I can say about the other side of the question. And we don't know how to define an event that would that would produce coherence in a large number of trees or animals. Um, Although we can kind of infer that there might be some synchronizing effects. Now, one of my colleagues, Peter Bancel, did an analysis of big earthquakes, Richter magnitude 6 and greater. Did this quite a few years ago, so it didn't include all this data. But um, what he it was he had, I think, 600 earthquakes and 500 were in the oceans, and only 100 were on land. And what we found was that in the earthquakes on land, and the Richter magnitude 6 means the destruction of villages and quite a few deaths often. It's a big earthquake.
Yeah.
What he found was a pattern that in some of the data that was sort of random. And then a few hours, about 8 hours before the main trembler, the earthquake itself hit, it started going down. And then it reached bottom at the time of the earthquake, and then came back up again and went on. In other words, it created a V shape with a roughly 10 or 15 hour duration around the earthquake, and it didn't show up. That same pattern did not show up in the earthquakes that were on in the ocean. That it didn't affect people at all. It only
Okay.
affected animals in the ocean, as far as we know. And
Yeah.
apparently, they didn't care. It didn't synchronize their minds.
Okay.
And so now another sort of slightly nuttier vignette. I got a serious email from somebody that said, well, why don't we just burn all the plant life on a small island in the Caribbean? Burn all the, just burn it down. And all the animals will be dying and afraid. And we can ask whether that turned your network on. I said, no, thank you.
It's pretty dark mind came up with.
So we haven't made any critical tests like that.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I thought we'd show also just, I mean, obviously this is just one example. And as you say, what was it? Did you say a third of the time you see no correlation when you expect it?
Well,
Was that right?
it's 2/3 of the time we
2/3
see
of the time. I got it the wrong way around.
correlation in the direction we expect.
Yeah, so 2/3 of the
And
time. So only a third of the time you see this correlation, but it's still far more than chance when you accumulate it over 500 events, as you said, 1,000,000,000 to 1. But this is an example of where you did get what you expect, and that's in the
yeah, that is
yeah, September the 11th.
a good indicator of how powerful the effect might be or can be. But it's one of the most extreme events that any of us living can recall in our history. This is like war. Anyway, this is a 9/11 when the terrorist attacks knocked down the World Trade Towers and hit the Pentagon. And this shows 9 days with 3 or 4 days of ordinary random walk, or ordinary random data, the kind we expect to see from random number generators that are not being pushed around. And then on September 11th, or slightly before, as it appears, that changed radically, so that the data became highly correlated internally and produced this strong deviation, positive deviation. It goes on for 3 or 4 days and then reverts to a random walk again after these few days. So in other words, around the September 11th, there was a huge effect on the global consciousness network. These random number generators became correlated with each other. They became autocorrelated over time, so that the data show we, as a kind of global entity, consciousness, changed the way the random number generator ran very strongly.
Yeah.
Because of the organizing effect, of the cohering effect that this monstrous attack had on us.
Yeah. And then this is zoomed in, right? You
Yeah,
get
that's the very, very sharp close up, just 4 hours, where you can see that there was basically nothing happening that's unusual to the random number generator trace for the first half of that time. It basically looks like confusion, which I think is probably a good description of how we were.
yeah.
I mean, most people were wondering what is happening,
Mm.
where did this come from, what can we do, and but not in a kind of coordinated way. And then when everything collapsed, it looks like it might have shifted into a mode where people are saying, "Oh my God, let's try to become a coherent world to deal with the aftermath of this, and maybe become better at being human beings on this earth."
Yeah.
That
And
was,
then
of course, I am now emoting in my own style. There were a lot of people who were angry. There were a lot of people who were upset, but without a question, there's a tremendous amount of synchronization of what was going on afterwards. We had the television were showing the same pictures again and again and again. We were all brought into the same, the collapse again and again and again. Yeah.
Mm.
Sorry, Richard.
No. I think it's just valuable for people to see that in the data. And I said, when I was reading the book Connected, these really stood out for me, these graphs. I was very grateful you'd included them, because it really helped paint the picture. Um, So one question in my mind is that do you have a view on why it is that for 2/3 of the time, despite these very large events, for whatever reason, either we're not cohering our consciousness together as humans, or we are, but it's not being registered in the machines. What's going on?
Well, an easy answer from it, this is a statistician speaking, is that you win some, you lose some. Basically, it's like, and also, and a more serious answer. There's a lot of things we don't know, like what is an event that causes coherence, and we actually studied meditation, giant meditations organized over the web and by various means, quite a bit, just because they are so easy, they're well defined and easy to think about, and to capture data in service of analysis, right? So, one of the things we discovered is that by no means are all meditations alike. Uh, the If we look at uh, a kind of concatenation of all the what my friend Brian Wilson calls harmonious events or global harmony events, turns out that that's a pretty strong accumulation. But once again, some of the accumulated global harmony events have a result that goes backwards, and some go forward. More go forward, so the outcome is tens of thousands of one against chance to explain it. So back to the meditations, we have discovered with fair certainty that there are certain kinds of meditations that will produce the downward going trend, the negative correlation. All those words, we should sort of stop hearing them as value laden words. Negative is just a downward trend. Negative is just a smaller correlation or different kind of correlation. It's not evil or
Yeah.
black or bad, it's not terrible. And so if we have something like a group induced, intense, mindful meditation, it tends to produce a downward trend in negative correlation, which is not negative. It's a
Yes.
very
No, it's still
successful
interesting.
outcome. It's
Yeah.
just different from what we predicted for the gen. I had to make a prediction one way or the other, and the previous work with the field REG suggested I should make a positive prediction because there isn't any effort by anybody to push it one way or the other, so it could go either way, right? And but I didn't. I wanted to be able to do statistics that said, "Here's a prediction. Here's the outcome. Did it match the prediction, or was it the opposite?" And
Yeah.
so that's what we did. And 2/3 of the time, it matched the prediction, not so strongly that it would become so-called significant, but at least it went in the right direction, in the predicted direction. And 1/3 of the time, would wind up going in the opposite direction.
Right. And then 1/3 of the time it went as expected.
No, I must have misspoken earlier. It's 2/3 of the time it went as expected.
Oh, okay.
2/3 of
Yeah.
the time,
But I thought it was. Yeah. So 2/3 of the time we get it as expected, and 1/3 it goes the other way. Okay, got it.
yeah, we had more wins than losses by a factor of two.
Yeah, got it. Um, the next observation I make, Brendan, but this comes towards the end of your book, was that I found interesting. We just touched on meditation, and it doesn't always work, and only certain types of meditation seems to work. But it was interesting to me that was at the bottom in terms of the categories of events that cause an impact. And I'll just go through the list because I found it interesting. So religious at the top, then celebrations of some sort, then violence, then disorder, social disorder, I'm supposing. Then I've got written here social, then demonstrations. I'm presuming that's like protest demonstrations, and then meditation right at the bottom. Um, which,
It's,
have you got kind of any observations on that? I found that interesting.
well, I too find it interesting. Um, I think the answer is basically that there are different kinds of meditations. Now, I should start a little bit earlier and more like a statistician would. It's just the variability of the situation. We don't know enough to make the predictions that are completely sound. So we worked on meditation quite a while because it was surprisingly to most of us at the bottom of the list in terms of a consistent effect. It had an inconsistent effect. Quite a few strong positive deviations, but also quite a few strong negative deviations, and not just. So we're looking at real deviations, probably at least most of the time. So it's not just random statistical noise; it's a real thing. So there are some meditations that push in the positive correlation direction, some push in the negative correlation direction, and so we did work on it for that reason, really, to try to understand better. And
Right.
people really want to have some kind of a scientific gadget that will measure their effect on the world or on each other or whatever. And I have to I have tried very hard to persuade every time somebody sends me one of those notes that says, "Please do our event. Please tell us how this worked." I always tell them the best measurement instrument that you have is your heart and mind. So,
You're right.
for,
Yeah.
for the effect of meditation, how does it feel?
Okay.
Your heart is going to tell you the truth. Yeah. My machine, it will do the best it can, but it won't necessarily know how to tell you the truth.
Right. Right. I get it. But I can also see the value of it's kind of a biofeedback device. You can imagine if, you're a religious leader and you have the intent of making your services more coherent, or you want to kind of get a bigger spike in consciousness, or however you frame it, then having a device like this in the room and recording it, and okay, so that event went better than that one. I mean, can you see its application as a biofeedback device?
Yeah, actually, we've, especially in the new version, GCP2, we paid a lot of attention to that. And actually, GCP2 has a series of events where um, a particular healer, um, blocking his name is something like Dinazio, something like that.
Oh, Joe
Damasio.
Dispenza.
Dispenza, yeah.
Yeah.
So he does the same kind of thing at time after time in different venues with different groups of people and so forth. But so we have been sending out where a stack of our new random number generators to be in the room where he's doing this thing, right? And also looking at the data on the globally spread network of those devices. And what it turns out that there is a correlation between the ones in the room and the ones that are out on the planet somewhere else. Okay,
Whoa.
that's pretty cool. And then, but to get back to your question, which is a very, it's an important one. How should people think about this? I'm pretty sure that Joe Dispenza says, I can't be worried about those random number generators. I'm busy healing. And he is. I think that's what's going on. He's got a job to do and a responsibility to of being a certain way, which is connected with all these people who are depending on him for whatever he's doing, the healing and so on. So he can't. He doesn't want to divert the energy to thinking about the REG. Let it do what it does, and which is, you may remember, that's very much what I said was part of the successful people in the laboratory. That's their way of dealing. Let that machine be. Let it do what it does while I am holding an intention. Let it do what I want.
Okay. Yeah.
Listen,
No, 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 that's a very good point, right? You know, if you're there thinking, "How can I make this machine go in the right direction?" When you've got an audience to, to connect to, yeah, you could potentially get it could be counterproductive, right? I can
yeah,
see it.
that's why I try to get people to pay attention to their heart,
Yeah,
instead of
yeah.
worrying about what the random number generator says. Not that that's what they're usually doing. They just would like to have a supplementary measure. Yeah. And this is another sort of, you might call it arcane statistical point, but it's important. There is so much variability and the effect is so small that there's always, when you get like a disease score that says, here's the score, it's 3 or 4. And that means it's way away from what random number generator should do. It still has a distribution around it. It's not really a 3. It's not really a 4. It's really a 3 plus or minus a bunch. And the bunch could go all the way back to being non-significant. So um, what I have determined, or we have, as the people doing the statistics, is that we can't make a judgment based on one event, not even one as powerful as 9/11. Although there I'm pretty tempted to say there's no way this is going to be any kind of an artifact. Anyway, we need 24 events or 36 events for the noise to be sort of filtered. In a distribution like that, most of that distribution is noise. Your effect, called 3, is out there somewhere. But the noise, if you do 10 or 20 or 30 events, the noise gradually, because it's noise, doesn't have any structure, it cancels itself ultimately because there's no rhyme or reason. So the noise deviation settles down and the signal, the real event signal, pokes up out of that. It gradually rises because it does have structure. It does have some substance and it can be built upon. You can build the pieces of it up until it gets stronger. The repetitions. So we do 10 replications, 20 replications at minimum if we want to try to understand what's happening in a circumstance. That's why I love those Joe Dispenza events. That he keeps on doing the healing. He doesn't care. Doesn't worry.
But what I found it fascinating there is he's not only is he getting effect in the room, he's connecting, as the I suppose the whole premise here would suggest, he's affecting consciousness globally with what he's doing
Yeah,
in
yeah,
that room, which
yep,
so and
mm,
maybe that's what I'm coming to here is that I sort of came into this conversation or this section of the conversation thinking, well, maybe there is a way to put something in the front of the room, and when I'm holding a meeting or I'm doing something, I've got a way for us as a group to ensure we're even more coherent and powerful. Well, maybe that's not the message here. It's just the knowledge that we can connect to each other, we can have an impact globally, when we put our minds together, when we connect to each other through the heart. And that really is the lesson here
yeah,
to take.
yep. It's the lesson that I was talking about when I said we've been praying for thousands of years, and we don't do stuff that's pointless and stupid, right? We do stuff that works, and
Right.
even though it doesn't work instantly or reliably or necessarily, we know that it's a good thing to go ahead and wish for good weather if that's what we want. um, I,
Yeah.
I actually did an experiment on that once upon a time, but we probably need to stay on track a little bit. So the
Well,
best thing
well, come
people
on now. Did you bring the rain?
know, it
What
was
was
the other way.
done?
It was I looked at a historical record of government data on how much it rained in Princeton.
Oh, I saw that in the book, and it turns out you did have sunnier days for your pair reunions or your pair event. All
Yeah,
right.
you actually know that?
I saw it's in the book.
Oh, of course, yeah. And
Yeah.
so it turns out that one of my friends, Larry Dossey, wrote a book. Um, it was the subject is very daunting, but basically, you say you be careful what you wish for. You may get it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a for it's kind of a general description, but you can take it in the positive form. You do wish for what is best for the planet, for yourself. Keep the health of all beings in your prayers. Do the best you can to paint in your imagination and in the future that you are creating. Do the best you can to make it beautiful.
Yeah. Beautiful message. Um, I feel like we could end the podcast right on that message. And I don't want to leave the conversation without exploring a little bit around this question of, okay, so we're all connected. There is this global consciousness. What the hell is it? What is this stuff?
Well, what I can say is that we don't know, and partly that's because it's unconscious. This connection that we share, and I think the evidence is really quite strong that we do share an unconscious connection. But things that are in your unconscious, that are part of the unconscious world, can be brought up into awareness if we focus on that and we wish for a better understanding of who we are. That requires that we bring up into consciousness what is now unconscious. So I don't know how to do it in any kind of like formulaic way, but I do know that intending and wishing for a kind of increase in awareness of that we are connected, I wish for that for us all, because that will, with no question in my mind, that will bring us closer together and bring us better to be able to understand what our job is on this planet. And as my intellectual mentor, Teilhard de Chardin, said, we are here not as the pinnacle of evolution. Teilhard de Chardin was an incredible poetic writer. So he wrote a book called The Phenomenon of Man, which explains evolution. And starting from the dead particle and going on through all the stages, and finally getting to us. And he says we may understand and believe that we are the pinnacle of evolution, and in some very powerful sense, we are. But he said we're not finished. There
Ah,
is another stage, and we are destined to become a sheath of intelligence for the earth, a kind of layer of knowledge, which he called the noosphere, which is a sphere of knowing for the earth. That's our destiny. And we're at the moment, when we look around and we listen to anything that you might call news, it looks like we're so far from that, it's impossible. But if we keep in mind that that's what we're really here for, I think it may become, it will become more likely. Anything that you want to wish for is more likely than if you didn't wish for it.
right.
That's the scientific finding.
Yes.
High numbers on the random number generator? Yeah. If I wish for them, they're more likely than if I didn't wish.
Right. Right. So this is where we're headed. This noosphere. Does that mean we dematerialize, or it just means we stay embodied and connected in a different way?
That's a really good question. And I don't know the real answer, but my feeling about it is that we stay embodied. And we stay, we maintain our individuality while connecting into a bigger and more beautiful kind of consciousness that we can share with everybody. It doesn't mean that we can't do our own creative stuff,
Right.
but we can not only do our own creative stuff, but get together with a bunch of people that are ready to roll and make something awesome.
Right. Which is reminiscent somewhat of are you familiar with the telepathy tape?
Somewhat familiar. I've listened to some of them. Yeah, and
Well,
it's
there is this influence that, well, not a claim, it's not influence, it's a claim that um, some of the non-verbal autists that are featured in that documentary series have this place called the Hill. Have you heard of that?
Yes.
Where they take their consciousness and me. And of course, this has been ridiculed and dismissed by the people criticizing it out there. But that is somewhat reminiscent with what you've just described.
Yeah. I'm probably in the same, in danger of the same fate, being ridiculed. But I don't mind, as long as a few people pay attention. If I can, as they always say in these kinds of circumstances, if I can change just one mind, blah, 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 right? If we can, r- there's a lot of ways to put it, but together we are extremely powerful.
Mm,
Apart, we are weak and unguided. But together we can make a plan and follow the plan and go. We can go somewhere.
right.
But as it
Yeah.
is, we got all kinds of people going off in this direction. I I could say firing off in this direction and that, and uncoordinated. Yeah, Buckminster Fuller, another intellectual mentor, said in such beautiful, complete sentences that if we all get organized, there's plenty on this earth for us all to have a beautiful, fulfilling life. No need for strife or difficulties at all. All we have to do is organize ourselves.
Yeah.
But that's not so easy, as it turns out. People like Buckminster Fuller were amazingly organized. The guy could talk for an hour without repeating himself and actually progress through from the beginning to the end of an absolutely important idea. It was awesome.
Yes. Well, perhaps he was connected to a good source of
Yeah,
information and order that he was able to tap into.
I think so. Yeah, and reminds me of early days when I was developing the GCP, the project. I had one coincidence after another befall me in such a way as to believe these are not really coincident. This is a stepwise process. I needed this, and so it happened. I needed that, and it came to be, and one after another. So there's a chapter in that book. It's called "Designed by Coincidence." It's
Right.
my favorite chapter title. And it talks a bit about all that amazing stuff.
Yes.
We are on we're on a planet that's spinning and we know not why, and is traveling through a universe we know not where. But it really doesn't matter because we are in our own universe. And we can build such an amazingly interesting one if we put our heads together.
Yeah.
And the thing is, beautiful thing is, we don't even have to put our heads together physically. We can just love each other.
Love
That
each
works.
other. Hang out in consciousness. Right. Yeah. And my next question is where are we going? Because the project closed, as I understand it. So what's the current status? And what's being developed?
I'm still running the network, but it's very small now. Only the people who are, so who are interested in still maintaining their egg, the device out there. So most of my energies with regard to this project are going to GCP 2.0, which is really the product of a wonderful gathering of people, a committee of people from Heart Math Institute. Roland McCready, the director of research there, actually heads GCP 2.0, and I'm deeply grateful. Several of his colleagues from Heart Math, two or three, four people from IONS, Institute of Noetic Sciences, including Dean Radin, who's been engaged and involved in the GCP from practically the beginning. And people from the old GCP itself, me and Paul Bethke and a couple of other people, and outsiders. People came in from who knows where. There's a guy from Sweden, an economist, who's been doing incredible, enlightening, and surprising analyses about having correlation between what the stock market does and what GCP data are doing. And then Avanti, who lives in Australia, but sometimes she lives in India, and sometimes I don't know where she is, who's an absolutely fantastic mathematician who is able to understand things that I can't and explain them. So we have a team that's doing GCP 2.0. Nachum Planke, who's a primary analyst. Anyway, it's now 350 nodes in a world-spanning network and quite a few clusters, which is a group of 20 devices in one area, like an important area like New York City or Mecca or maybe Shanghai. I'm not sure where in China, Moscow. And there are lots of plans and lots of things going on. If people are interested to see where it's going, the website is gcp2.net, N-E-T, gcp2.net. And so there's a lot of work already done. There's analyses of various kinds of things, including some that the Joe Dispenza kinds of things, and like the correlation between the local and the global network. That stuff is there. People can
Well,
study.
just briefly to touch on that, because I picked up on that there was a sequence of data you did. I think this was on the in the original GCP project where the effect. I think this was of midnight celebrations, right? The effect was higher on the local eggs, the local sensors, whereas we tend to think of these effects as non-local. So what's the explanation there?
I'm not sure I know what you're referring to, unfortunately.
Okay.
And in the original GCP, the setup was intended as a global network question all the time. So asking about local things. And the answer came in the form of correlation between devices that were separated from each other. Two random number generators going, working together. That is the basic element in the effect. So it stretches the paradigm to try to do an analysis on one device. Okay. So if it shows some kind of deviation, we don't know whether it's correlated with something else or not. But I did do a little exploration nevertheless, like around 9/11. That was such an extraordinary event. And we did have fairly local devices in New York and Washington. And we also had, of course, the rest of the network. It turned out the largest effect on a single device was actually two devices in Brazil, which is about 3,000 miles away from New York. And the effect on the West Coast was smaller than the East Coast, but in the middle of the country, it was larger. So what are you going to do? In other words, the answer to that particular, it seemed like well-formed question. It's really messier than we would like. So for a well-formed question. It turns out it's not as well-formed as we imagined. And there are things like we were able to ask about distance, the distance between the devices anyway. The actual events are almost always in a consciousness space, not in geographic space. So if we say, what about the distance from New York City? That question is not exactly, doesn't really work well because, of course, the effect was also powerful on people in London and in New Delhi and Japan and in South America and so on. So I'm talking about 9/11 effects.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So what can we do? Well, we can look at the effect of distance on as a function of this separation between these two devices that become correlated during an event. And what we find is if it's a truly global event, there's no decrease in the correlation strength between devices as they go further apart. There is a tiny noticeable correlation if the event is a small event, which is so local that much of the world doesn't know about it. And we did do that kind of once in a while, just to cover the territory. Like, for example, I can't remember her name, but an extremely popular author in Norway, known to all Norwegians, she passed. So we asked, what about the global consciousness effect? It wasn't very powerful over the whole globe, but the local pairs were more correlated than we expect by chance. That's
Ah,
what,
so that would suggest, at least in that scenario, that there is a local effect.
yeah, I think it's probably fair to say that, but you know, the instrument we designed was actually designed to ask other questions. One very simple question: is there a global response of some sort in the network of devices when there is a global event, which
Yeah,
affects large numbers of people and brings them all together?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And the answer is yes.
The
Or
answer
at
is
least there's a 1 in a trillion chance that there isn't.
yeah, 3 in a trillion.
Oh, 3 in a trillion. Okay.
Yeah. What I mean, when the numbers get that big, you can forget about the numbers. You say, yeah, there is in fact,
There's an effect. Yeah.
as long as the data are sound, the experiment is done right. If there's no falsification or chicanery, then you can say there is an effect
Yeah.
because yeah,
Yeah.
there's no way in. I mean, a trillion to one odds that requires years probably of experiments of one at a time, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Okay. Well, this has been fascinating. I've loved this conversation.
me
And
too.
yeah, and your presence is somebody who's just connected to their heart. Yeah. Yeah. And just tuned in. So I love the lesson that I took from this book and the one we've emphasized that we can connect to each other. There is a connection, and
Yeah.
let's cherish that
Cherish that and build it, right?
and build it onwards to the newest sphere.
Yeah. There we go. I must say that the connection with you is very nice. This has been a very pleasant kind of thing. I was just telling my wife, I'm going to have to stop doing these sometimes because I'm getting too old, but I'm not too old yet. Not for a fun conversation.
Good.
So
I'm glad. I'm glad you're still young and able to chat to me. And yeah, there's such an important topic. I mean, this is part of the human. This is part of the human
yeah,
experience.
you're right.
Let's explore
Um,
it.
so thank you for the invitation and for a really interesting conversation.
No, thank you. And I wish you very well with GCP2.net. Yeah, and I hope that takes this forward and continues to build on what you created.
And this podcast is called On Being Human.
Called Being Human. It's being called
Being
Being
Human.
Human. Yeah, and we'll
I'll
put the
take it.
link to the book. We'll put the link to the
I will take it. Be human. All right.
right. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much once again, Roger. Thank you.
Thank you.